everybody for coming, and welcome to the 45th Forum on Tolerance, Black Lives Matter Part 2, the U.S. Journey Towards Justice and Healing. We have a really exciting event today. I'm just the chair of the Forum on Tolerance Committee, Lori Carlson, and I would like to introduce our VP of Academic Affairs, Dr. Karen Heineck, who is going to welcome the audience, and then Michelle Cubelli-Harris will introduce our two speakers for tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Carlson. Welcome, everyone. We're so thrilled that you could join us tonight. First, I'd like to thank the members of the Forum on Tolerance Committee, Dr. Lori Carlson, Sheldon Brown, Tan Gaderi, Lisa Altamari, Yusuf Hayes, Carl Jean, Amanda Dooling, Jen Chavez, Rob LeBlanc, Wanda Ponther Hill, Sherry Rafferty, Lily Kaplan, Kara Kaufman, and Michelle Cubelli-Harris for putting this event on this evening. Black Lives Matter is a critical movement in our nation's history, opening our eyes and our consciousness to the systemic racism that Black Americans face on a regular basis. We are so impressed to have this distinguished panel here tonight to talk with us about how to have racial justice and really get our country back together again and making sure that it has equality for all. I'd like to introduce Michelle Cubelli-Harris.
Thank you, Karen. I'm happy to have the pleasure of introducing our panelists, Reverend Bennett and D.A. Rollins. Reverend Andre Bennett is an immigrant from Jamaica, is the youth pastor at the Zion Baptist Church here in Lynn. Many of us are familiar with his powerful story of being pulled over by the police on Route 128 and receiving a $365 ticket for doing 60 in a 55-mile zone. Although the ticket was overturned, the angry officer's memory has lingered with him all these many years later. He's a graduate of UMass, Endicott College, and the Atlantic Coast Theological Seminary. Reverend Bennett has a certificate and an associate's degree in developmental disabilities right here from North Shore. He is an inspirational leader with the Essex County Community Organization, known as ECHO, a diverse network of congregations and organizations across the North Shore working on building relationships and putting power to human dignity at the center of public life. Andre is a passionate social activist, working with many local colleges and community organizations to improve the lives of immigrant communities. Reverend Bennett was recently the subject of an article in the North Shore magazine as a de facto leader of the Black Lives Matter movement on the North Shore. While the district attorney needs no introduction, I'll offer some context. Suffolk County District Attorney Rachael Rollins is the chief law enforcement official for Boston, Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop, Massachusetts, and oversees an office of approximately 300 people handling 35,000 new cases each year. She took office on January 2nd, 2019, as Suffolk County's 15th district attorney and made history as the first woman to be selected to that position in Suffolk County and the first woman of color ever to serve as a Massachusetts district attorney. In 2018, the people of Suffolk County chose District Attorney Rollins to represent them as their district attorney and to effect meaningful, substantive reform to the criminal justice system. She pledged to pursue that mission tirelessly by reducing incarceration, correcting racial and ethnic disparities, adopting alternatives to traditional prosecution, focusing the office's limited resources on serious and violent crimes, and improving relationships between law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve. An attorney for 20 years with degrees from Northeastern University School of Law and Georgetown University Law Center, she is a recipient of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association Trailblazer of the Year Award and was selected as Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly Attorney of the Year in 2018 and received the Ida B. Wells Barnett Award from the Boston branch of the NAACP. I'll never forget the feeling of such pleasure watching her be sworn in at the Roxbury Community College auditorium, being heralded in by Kool and the Gang's song Celebration. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Andre Bennett and the Suffolk County District Attorney Rachael Rollins. I'll also take a brief minute to introduce our moderator. Dr. Jennifer Harris is a professor of psychology here at North Shore, co-chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Collaborative, and she's also known as a goddess. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. It is also a great honor for me to moderate this esteemed panel of two people that I admire so very, very much. So we'll get started. First of all, could you each introduce yourself and explain what the Black Lives Matter movement means to you?
Want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Awesome. So I'm Rachel. I'm the elected district attorney in Suffolk County, which is Boston, Chelsea, Winthrop, and Revere. There are 11 elected DAs in Massachusetts. I'm one of 3 women and the only person of color who's an elected district attorney in Massachusetts right now. The Black Lives Matter movement is incredibly important to me in that it has done, exceptional work in notifying people, not just across our country, but outside of, a specific area about the harms that many of us know exist. And then it's global in the sense that we've seen with a George Floyd, an Ahmaud Arbery, a Breonna Taylor. Sadly, with other people we have that, might live, like the Army lieutenant that we just saw pepper sprayed, and thank God he lived, but Donta Wright happening, less than 10 miles from where we are all watching, or I'm actually not watching because it's just too painful to, the Derek Chauvin trial. So I think what they have done masterfully is messaged and given information to a large group of people because they, quite frankly, knew that the media, which is not diverse, was not going to tell their story. And so rather than waiting for people to do so, they jumped up and did it themselves.
Good evening. And before I introduce myself, I might start some kind of controversy and get myself backlash for saying this, but DA Rollins, it's an honor to be in the same space with you. I'm totally fanning out right now. You should know that. I'm Reverend Andre Bennett, Reverend Dr. Andre Bennett, Reverend Andre, Minister Bennett are all the names that I go by. I currently serve as the president of the board of directors for ECHO, the Essex County Community Organization. I am a resident of Peabody. I am a proud past student of North Shore Community College. I have done an extensive amount of studying and schooling since I came here 12 years ago, and no institution that I've been to comes close to what I've received and the community I found when I was at North Shore Community College. So that's North Shore holds a very special place in my heart. I have evolved. My relationship with the Black Lives Matter movement evolved. I remember when Black Lives Matter just started, I was one of those people who would insert all lives matter because I didn't fully get the context coming from a conservative Christian nation like Jamaica, where clergy don't get involved in social justice action and avoid anything that appears to be politically aligned. I didn't get it. I thought all lives matter. I was that person who would stand in the pulpit and say, well, it's not black versus white, it's love versus hate and good over evil, that kind of stuff. Until, and I will get into that a little bit later, until my son, who is now 18 years old, but at the time was 10 years old, just started making utterances when these news reports and these things were coming to light, just started making utterances that made me realize that not only was Black lives under attack, but my very generation, my very bloodline was in threat of being vanquished, if you will, or eliminated. And that's when it became clear to me, because my son, again, we live in Peabody. My son, we moved briefly to Gloucester, so we've always been in all white, pretty much, school districts. My son has nothing but primarily white friends. In Peabody, there's a few Latinx friends that he has, but it's primarily all white, and they never had the concerns that he at 10 years old had. And that's what changed my thought process into accepting that Black lives matter. At least I know for me and mine, our lives certainly matter. And if our lives matter, then the lives of everyone who look like us certainly matter. Again, maybe 4 years, well, maybe 2 years later, something major happened, and my son, driving to church again, my son became, that hammer, that conscience hammer that got down on me, and I threw myself into social justice action, not necessarily to be doing what I'm doing now. I never thought of this, but I just knew that I wanted my son's life to be spared, and I wanted him to have some kind of comfort or assurance that he will live to see adulthood and live freely to see adulthood. And this is what the movement, it's more than just the marches and the chants and the demonstrations that we see. For me, it is my hope for survival. It is my hope for my next generation. Incidentally, I'm currently in Washington State with my daughter, who is getting ready to give birth to my first grandchild. And just even thinking about that, I'm thinking of ways to connect even more with the work that I do.
Thank you so much. Okay, this one is for DA Rollins. Academic researchers recently released a study looking at the impact of misdemeanor prosecutions in Suffolk County over the past 20 years. What were the conclusions of that study? How do those conclusions guide you?
I ran on a platform. So I'm most excited about my job because it's honestly, guys, the first job I've ever had where it's like, I didn't even like briefly fib on my resume, right? Like, and I get it. You guys are all perfect and you've never sort of said you did a little bit more than you actually didn't. I was the most authentic self I have ever been in my life when I ran for office. In fact, 6 weeks before my primary election, there were 5 Democrats in the primary. I put up on my website in writing a page that said, here's my list of potentially like do not prosecute. These are 15 areas of nonviolent, non-serious crimes where I'm going to flip the presumption from you getting arrested and automatically being arraigned and maybe even incarcerated, but certainly tangled up in the system for at least 6, 9, 12 months. I'm going to flip it to we're going to decline, divert, or dismiss, because overwhelmingly those 15 categories of nonviolent, non-serious crimes involve somebody who is having a mental health crisis, had a substance use disorder, was suffering from food or housing insecurity, or was homeless. I'm very comfortable saying easily 60 to 70% of my municipal and district court cases, you do not need to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. You don't have to have a DSM-5 next to you to pull up the diagnoses. You would be able to look and say, that woman has a mental health issue. Rachael Rollins, or she is on heroin right now in court, right? Like, so sadly, that's what we're dealing with. So I was bold, I put it out there and I said, if you believe in this, and we're gonna collect the data and we're gonna see what it shows us and we're gonna adapt appropriately, vote for me. If you don't vote for me, right? And I won the primary with 42% of the vote in a crowded primary. The next person had about 20%. And then in the general against a Republican, I won with over 80% of the vote. And then within 3 months, I issued the Rollins memo, which is basically to me a love letter to the criminal justice system to say, this is what I believe we can be, right? This is what we aspire to be in Suffolk County and what I hope we can be, right? Where your immigration status, your zip code, or your bank account does not dictate whether you get or quite frankly, your melanin count doesn't dictate your result in a criminal court. And unfortunately, we know that all of those things definitely impact that. So within 2 weeks of being inaugurated and taking my little oath to not too cool in the gang celebration, but after we walked in, 3 PhDs approached me and said, can we look at all your data? You can't edit anything we find. You know, we're going to go back many, many years. And I said, yeah, sure. Signed it. And I swear I forgot, right? Like went on with everything. And just a couple of weeks ago, the National Bureau of Economic Research published these 3 fabulous women, PhDs, studies that went back 17 years looking at those categories of crimes for me. So even though there wasn't the Rollins list of 15, those crimes were crimes on the books back in 2004. And when we dismissed, instead of arraigning you, you did not recidivate at high rates at all. In fact, you know, we saw things where almost 75% of the time you didn't recidivate at all. And then shockingly, when we look at the people that when they touch the system for one of those 15 areas of crimes, if we did arraign you, you recidivated at an incredibly high rate. So said like the way that I normally say it is like, if we leave you alone and don't bother you, you don't come back into the system. If we get you some, you know, health or community services, you don't come back, and we aren't entangling you in ways that we need to. But once we touch you, sadly, it gets worse sometimes, right? Not only do you recidivate, but you don't recidivate at one of those 15 low-level nonviolent crimes. You might escalate to something a little bit higher, right? No, you aren't going to likely go from a trespass to a homicide, but you might go, you know, to a robbery, right? Or an assault and battery or an unarmed robbery or something like that. So the data was fascinating. We were really proud to see it. And the most important part, guys, though, is all of these cases we're talking about, these are misdemeanor murders, right? George Floyd, a counterfeit $20 bill, that's a misdemeanor. And what Derek Chauvin did was tried, sentenced, convicted and executed one person in all. That's not what the police are supposed to do. They're there to protect and serve. They should arrest you and then turn you over to the court where the district attorney decides, are you going to be prosecuted or not? And then a jury of your peers decides the facts of the case and the judge decides the law. And if you're guilty, the judge then decides your sentence, right? So when we look at Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and I believe Ahmaud Arbery was also police involved, because remember, the father, the McMichael father, he worked in the DA's office, right? And he was a former police officer. So there is all this stuff, guys, that we need to recognize to the, and look, my dad is a white Irish man. So I say to my white brothers and sisters on this call, the thought of you being pulled over and killed for having an air freshener that was obstructing your mirror in your car is the equivalent of me saying to you, I'm about to turn into a unicorn and fly through the screen. Like, you just can't even comprehend a world where that happens. But the Reverend and I have a daughter who's 17. When she goes out, I worry about encounters that she may have with law enforcement. There is a talk we give to our family members that white families don't have to necessarily give about being killed by the government that we pay our taxes to. So I know that is a lot to hear, but I feel like all of that is connected. We have too many interactions in certain communities for low-level nonviolent crimes, while the police are not solving in those same communities murders, rapes, and kidnappings. If you were there all the time and solving those things instead of bothering 14, 15, 16, 17 overwhelmingly Black and brown men, I would not be as upset about the massive police presence. But we have all this presence and none of the solving of crime, right? And then our low-level interactions can result and escalate into not only harm from a police officer to a police officer, which of course I don't want either, right? But also could result in death. So we have to think about that list of 15. It wasn't just me being like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, no, they're all connected, right? They can escalate, and we need less touches with law enforcement in certain communities.
Thank you so much. And I just want to let you know my dog decided to start barking. So I'm going to ask this question very quickly for Dr. Reverend Bennett. How have you seen prosecution for misdemeanors, crimes impact your community? What do you think of the study that DA Rollins just mentioned?
Thank you for that, and thank you, dear Rollins. You know, when Michael Brown was murdered, we remember Michael Brown. When Michael Brown was murdered, my daughter was still living at home. She currently serves in the Navy. Three of my three eldest children serve in the Navy currently. My daughter was still living at, well, all of them were still living at home. I had just gotten exposed to PICO, which is now Faith in Action National, and this is a national federation of faith leaders from all across the country that you know does community organizing and around various social justice issues. And I remember started getting calls. You know, I was what you'd call up and coming within Faith in Action at the time. And I was getting calls from all over the country to go to Ferguson, and you know, I didn't. I didn't because I had a number of conflicts, right? And I remember after, you know, it started dying down. My daughter asked me one day, we were in the living room, and she said to me, why did you not go and speak up or lend your voice to what was happening in Ferguson? And I remember saying to her, because I didn't want you to think, I didn't want you or your brothers to think that I condone the actions of Michael Brown. That's why I did not go. And my daughter said, well, in you not going, out of fear of us not thinking that you condone the actions of Michael Brown, you've actually told us that the punishment for a crime that simple is death. That was what your actions told us. You know, there's a young man in my congregation that I'm getting ready to go see when I get back on Tuesday, when I get back to Boston on Tuesday. He just got out after 11 years, and it started as simple as trespassing. You know, I serve a predominant, and obviously as the DA, I will not pretend to be a law expert, but as you know, the DA says, when our kids get caught up in the system for very simple things, one, it affects their records, and so it makes meaningful employment difficult for them. It makes maintaining whatever employment they get sometimes almost impossible for them, because they might get the job and start, and within 3 weeks or a month, the background check comes back and they lose the job and they have to start over again. So what do you do? Because the system has put this mark upon you, survival becomes a thing, anger becomes a thing, a revenge becomes a thing. And unfortunately, you find that when those three connect, it clouds your better sense of judgment, right? I've always been conflicted when it comes down to the work of crime, police, and, you know, the side of the fence that I stand. Why? I come from the home of a single mother who was the senior superintendent of police in Jamaica. So I know the struggles of being a Black kid with no father in the house, but I also know the punishment of doing things because I live in a home run by a police woman who for a very long time was the only female senior superintendent of police in the island. And so she had to be 10 times tougher than her male counterparts. And so there's always that conflict. However, I, as an immigrant, I have a rap sheet that is a mile long. I have a rap sheet that is a mile long. Never had a rap sheet before I came to this country, and I genuinely do. And it's all for getting pulled over and getting arrested because my car sticker was expired. I got pulled over and I got arrested because I appealed a speeding ticket and missed the court date. So I got arrested for missing the court date. I have a rap sheet, and you know, thankfully, I'm in a position where I have set myself up in such a way where, you know, a background check won't necessarily impact my employment, my life, so to speak. That's not the case for 90% of the community that I serve. And so when the system is designed, I believe, to destroy our Black communities. As dear Rollins said, like, my son 4 years ago said to me, I want to move to Atlanta. And I said to Shay, why do you want to move to Atlanta? And he said, well, because I just want to be around Black people. I said, well, we can move to Boston for you to be around Black people. And he said to me, I don't know. I'm just sick and tired of you giving me the talk every single day. Unfortunately, I want you to live. I want you to live freely. I don't want you to get caught up in the system. So I have to give you the talk every single day. I still, at 18 years old, have to give you the talk every single day. When we get our kids caught up in the system because of, there are a number of reasons why kids do commit misdemeanor offenses, number of reasons. You look at the home setting, you look at survival, you look at mental health, you look at shortage of resources. There are a number. When we get them caught up, we're setting them back almost to a point where, and please help me, God, for this, almost to a point where there is no other option but to recidivate. There is no other option but to get even more caught up in the system. And so I am totally in agreement. I've also seen in my congregation where, a kid got, caught shoplifting, and luckily it's the supermarket behind the church, and so I was called over there right away, and we were able to talk it through. And the reality is, what he was shoplifting was for his kid sibling at home. It was like milk and stuff like that for his kid sibling at home. Now, whilst I do not condone the behavior, I totally understand the motivation. And I feel like if that situation had been different, I would be saying something entirely different to in terms of where he would end up. So, again, I'm in total agreement, and I feel like, and I thank you, dear Rollins, for making that a part of your priority, because I feel like it's definitely, this is something that affects primarily the Black and the brown community. And it's, if we're going to fix the system, me out there with my bullhorn is not enough. It needs to start on the web pages that become policies, that become law, to ensure that our community do not bear the brunt of it.
Yeah, and I would just add, the biggest community that is disproportionately and negatively impacted in the criminal legal system are poor people. So if you are poor and white, and look at Bill Cosby, if you have money and you can afford a lawyer that knows the system, as a former DA or a former US attorney, and knows all the judges and gets the right date and knows all the tricks, poor white people will do worse in the criminal legal system than rich Black people. But the second group is overwhelmingly, as the Reverend said, Black and brown. And I have to give props to your mom and your daughter. I know, I am so proud that you raised your daughter to be comfortable enough to say that to you, because no one is saying we think it's appropriate to break the law. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is, hey, I went to, and I don't know where all you guys are from, but I went to Buckingham, Brown and Nichols, right? So I went to a very white, I call it Buckingham White and Nichols, because I was the only brown there. But nonetheless, it's a great school. My daughter goes there now. I really love the school. But if there were metal detectors or police at BB&N, 3/4 of the whale belt wearing white kids I went to school with from Wellesley, Winchester, Waban, the W towns, right, would be arrested because they had dip, they had marijuana, they had cocaine, they had knives, they had all this other stuff, but they were just, also entitled, and their father or mother was a named partner at a big law firm.
Mm-hmm.
And they felt like if they were questioned about something, of course I won't go to jail for any of this, right? There is this reinforcement, Reverend, in our communities that you don't matter. right? And no one
Absolutely.
has to say that out loud to you. As a 50-year-old, I identify as Black, I'm biracial, but no one ever says like, you know, DA Rollins, you know, the Irish
Yeah.
DA, the white one
Yeah.
from Boston, you know her, she's Irish, right? No, they don't say that. And in fact, you know, if my father wasn't alive, like if I told you how many people, you know, try to say like me calling out racism is me being racist, no, it's not. So please stop. But again, I feel like there's a piece that we have to explain about the hypocrisy, right?
Mhm.
Of the entitlement, you know, that adolescence actually, one of the markers of adolescence is risky behavior, right? Is engaging in the very thing. You know, if we looked around here, and no, you're not being recorded, but I pointed to Michael Sullivan and said, Michael, have you ever broken a law before you were 21 years old? So you waited until you were 21 years old to have a drink, right? And maybe you can say I did, or you never smoked marijuana, or you never did this before it was legal. All of those things, those are markers of adolescence that we grow out of, and you're permitted to learn from and laugh about and tell a story to, and still have a great life. And our community is just trying to make it out alive from those markers, right?
Yep.
And so it is just, it's the hypocrisy, Reverend, that is
Yep.
the problem, where, you know, and I will end with, white men are infantilized and Black and brown children are looked at as adults, right? So when we
Absolutely.
see a Dylan Roof who, after murdering like 9 people, is gently escorted into a car, you know, stopped to make sure because he's hungry to get
He got
something to
something
eat,
to eat.
but like, stop, right?
Yeah.
So people think that I'm mean and blunt. I don't have time for your nonsense, right? Don't look at me and tell me you're all treated the same when we see something like that,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, but you know, and it happens in very, you know, very basic and simple ways as well. I remember a couple of months ago, I was in Beverly leading a silent march across the Beverly Salem Bridge, and the way with which the Beverly Police Department ambushed us. And it wasn't just me, it was a group of clergy and other lay people. And we were all dressed in our clergy garb. And you would think they were coming on a major drug bust, right? And I remember we got off the road, we got on the sidewalk, and we walked across the bridge, and we walked back. And when I got back to the Beverly City Hall, there were counter protesters across the street, in the street, just behaving completely out of control. One of the counter protesters, I have the bullhorn, I'm speaking to the group that is there supporting what we're doing, and he's this close in my face, yelling and screaming obscenities. I mean, spit is coming in my face. And I literally had to lift my hand. Cops were all around, and say to the police, I need someone over here now because I do not feel safe. And in my mind, I'm thinking, isn't this something strange? Like, you know, a group of clergy peacefully walking across the street were surrounded and ambushed like we are, you know, drug lords that you got a tip that we're about to do something major. But at the same time, I had to say to police who were clearly standing there, I feel like my safety is in jeopardy at this point in time. When you look at how, you know, a bunch of Black kids, and I'm okay with using the term Black, I'm a Black man, I was born this way and I will die this way. A group of Black kids are considered thugs and gangs. A group of white kids are considered boys just having a good time, or they were a little bit rowdy. It's the way with which, as the DA says, you know, white men in particular are infanticized, and, you know, Black people, kids, you know, teenagers, women, men are demonized. And I feel like that plays out just in the very, you know, misdemeanor cases that we see happen. I will shut up really quickly. Something happened in Florida where I got a call because there was 2 cases happening simultaneously at A&M University where 2 students, and I think I shared this before, 2 students, one black, one white, they both go to A&M. I think they share campus. They both had a party that they decided to go to. One of the kids went to the store and, picked up some stuff, shoplifted some stuff, I think like booze and stuff like that. The other kid used the same booze and stuff and spiked it and date raped one of his classmates. Both young men were sent before the same judge. Obviously, they were both charged, they were both sent before the same judge. None of the young men had any prior records of any sort. The judge looked at one and said, I can really ruin your life with that. And I'm giving you the condensed version. I can really ruin your life. However, I'm going to give you 2 years probation or suspended sentence, whatever the case is, along with community service. And he looked at the other one and says, I'm going to put you away for 6 years for the crime that you've committed. The one that he put away was a kid who shoplifted $300 and some odd worth of stuff at the store. The difference between the two, one's black, one's white. The kid who date raped a young girl, a black student at that, was a white kid. We later found out that his father was very wealthy, the whole 9 yards. And it's like, how do you look at 2 21-year-olds who've committed offenses, one more egregious than the other, if you ask me, but something inside of you is moved not to ruin the life of the other, but then you look at the next one and say, I am going to put you away. We cannot continuously.
There's promise, because there's promise in one life and not in the other.
Yeah.
And we have to be comfortable. And I know people hate hearing or saying that, but it's very interesting. Similar story. I was right after I took this job, sadly, we had we're lucky now that Boston, we only have about 50 homicides a year. It's 50 too many. Absolutely. But we are not Baltimore. We are not Chicago. Our numbers are not like that. And I remember, my staff was like, ugh, you always talk about race and whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, when we don't need to anymore, believe me, I'll be the first person to jump to the back of the line and not talk about it. They drafted a press release for me about an opioid addiction. And we had like 7 homicides of overwhelmingly Black people. And this one, though, was a precious life lost, was the wording they used. And it was. But what's hilarious to me is none of the other 7 was a precious life lost. And it was the first white person. And no one's saying, I think they at the end of the day, put their, KKK hood on and go back to ride to be a grand wizard.
Right,
no,
right,
but it's just, what have we been taught our whole lives, right? I think it is really an interesting concept to be like, I suffer from white supremacy, and I'm a person of color because I grew up as a 50-year-old woman. I never saw a doll that was my color. When we think about right now, I know where nobody has money anymore because we're all on our phones, but women and people of color, we aren't on money. And spare me your Susan B. Anthony coins, nobody has them, right? But when we look at statues, when we think of all these things, we aren't represented. That's what I was getting to, Reverend, is that children are so receptive to when you go to a charter school in Boston and there's not a single teacher that looks like you or speaks your language, right? Yeah. When you get arrested and the arresting officer, your criminal defense lawyer, your prosecutor, probation clerk, and judge, none of them look like you. Don't tell me you don't believe the system is set up against you, right?
Absolutely.
And so why, I will end with it's also the media, right? In the sense that I can't tell you how many times when we all used to actually not have COVID and be in person with each other. I swear to God, this has happened 5 or 6 times. I'd be in my elevator of my building, somebody, UPS, FedEx, whatever, some guy walks in. This is pre-COVID, so we could be near each other in an elevator. And they'd look at me, and I'd be obviously on my phone or something, and they'd look at me again and I'd say, can I help you? And they'd be like, are you DA Rollins? Yes. And I swear to God, whether appropriate or not, they'd say oh my God, you're you look normal. So I'm like, what do you mean? And so every photo of me whenever I'm talking, like there's I am many things. Photogenic is one of them, right? But the media doesn't want a photo of me smiling. They want a photo of me growling, right? And like yelling, white people, you know, it's like the splicing of like, I would like you to die. It's like, I never said that, right? But it's this narrative that they love portraying. It's the same way that I say, you never see Roxbury at, you know, the jazz festival. The media doesn't want to come to that, but I guarantee you tonight, if someone shot in Roxbury, every news syndicate will be here and I will be on your news tomorrow. So we have to work at everything, not just the criminal legal system, not just education, not just our environment, but who is telling these stories, because we keep perpetrating the same fraud.
Absolutely.
That very much leads into one of the other important questions, I think, is both of you have been closely involved in the Sean Ellis case and his eventual exoneration. Could you each describe how you got involved with his case, your role in his fight for justice, and what lessons you learned from his case?
Sure. So I'll go first, if you don't mind, dear Rollins. So I serve as the pastor of youth and young adults at Zion Baptist Church. Sean's sister, Sade, is a member of my youth leadership team at Zion Baptist Church. Sean's mother is the chair of the Pastors' Aid Committee at Zion Baptist Church. So there is the church piece of it. But I got to Zion Baptist Church primarily because of Sean Ellis. So while I was a student at North Shore Community College, I was also helping out with the Project Access program. I wonder if it's still there, I don't know. But the Project Access program, and I used to teach the art and music and movement and drama piece of, like, whenever we have those, we are offering those. I used to be either one of the lead instructors or a co-instructor in those programs. And I remember my daughter and I, my daughter was like my shadow when she was back home. Like, wherever you see me, you see my daughter. And we're coming from, it was probably 8 o'clock at night or close to 8. I'm coming from one of the classes. And I'm walking out the building, and there's this girl just running. At that time, I was serving at a different congregation in Lynn. I was pretty new to Lynn. I was serving at another congregation, but there's this girl running behind me screaming, Minister Bennett, Minister Bennett. So I said to my daughter, because I'm terrible with names and faces, so I said to my daughter, please look and see who it is and describe her to me and tell me if we know her. Because if my daughter says we know her, then we know her. My daughter's like, I don't think we know her. But long and short of it is, she stopped me with Sade. She told me that she had, you know, an exam. She was a student at North Shore at the time. She had an exam. I prayed with her. She found me on Facebook. She sent me a friend request. I ignored the friend request. She sent me 2 messages. I ignored the messages. She found me on Instagram. And I'm like, this girl is kind of stalking me right now. It's kind of stalking me. However, I finally, probably after about 3 months, responded to one of her Facebook messages. And that opened up just a relationship that is now sibling-like. Because she shared with me that her brother, you know, she was going through some stuff. She wanted someone to talk to. And, you know, obviously I had to ask the, you know, embarrassing question of, how do I know you again? Because I don't know you. She's like, oh, you came to our church and you spoke and you prayed, blah, blah, blah. So she said to me, she went on and said, and eventually said, oh, her brother is in prison, but he's coming out soon. So I said to her, and this is back in 2000 and I think 2009, 2010, somewhere there. She said her brother's in prison, is coming out soon. So I'm like, okay, I'm thinking it's, again, maybe like a misdemeanor. Her brother did something, and so I said to her, what did your brother do? So she said, he's in prison for murder. I said, he killed someone? She said, no, but that's what the system says. I'll never forget those words. She said, no, but that's what the system said. So I said to her, okay, so has his case been overturned? She said, no, but I believe it's going to be. I said, but this girl is batshit crazy, pardon my French. I said, this is crazy. In my mind, I'm thinking, when you go to prison in Massachusetts for murder, like, you have no way of getting out. Like, so what is this chick talking about? So she wanted to talk to me. She, you know, we set up an appointment and we met at my church office. At that time, like I said, I was serving at another congregation. Long and short of it is, Sade and I developed. a really close relationship through that interaction. And then after I transitioned to Zion, 2 years later, I'm serving as the acting, one of the acting senior pastors, because our senior pastor quit. And so the associate pastor and myself, it was only two of us, were kind of like juggling the roles together. Sean's mother came to me and she said, Sean has a chance of getting out. Now she's putting it entirely different than Sade put it 3 years before. Sean has a chance of getting out. But this, and this. So essentially what she's asking me to do was to write a letter to submit to his lawyer stating that I'm the pastor of the family. I've met with the family. I am here to provide spiritual support for the family, that kind of thing. I struggled with that. Again, I'm an immigrant. I'm on a visa. I have a young family. Like, we are not permanent residents. We're not citizens. I don't want to put my foot in any place that's going to be a landmine for me and my family. I just don't want to do it. And so I said to her, give me some time to think and pray on it. And she got up. She said, okay. And I shook her hand. She slid a piece of paper in my hand. Now I'm thinking, this is some kind of money this woman is trying to bribe me with. When I opened my hand, it was just a blank paper with justiceforshaunellis.com written on it. That's all. She wrote it. And I went home the night and I checked out the website and I was up for like 9 hours. You're reading one thing and one thing led to something else. And you're Googling and you're researching. And I'm thinking to myself, this system really screwed this kid over. So the morning I called her and I asked her, can I go see Sean? Because if I'm going to write a letter of support of any sort, I need to know what I'm getting into. And I went, and at that time, I think Sean was at Norfolk, I believe he was. And I went and I sat with him. And I remember, they have you sit in the waiting room and you get out. You sit there and the person comes out to you. And it was me and my assistant that went, and he came out. There was a big smile on his face. His eyes looked alive and well. And we sat across from each other for about 3 minutes before anybody spoke. And the first thing I said to him, why aren't you angry? And then I rephrased the question. I said, are you in fact angry? And he said, no. He said, I processed my anger. He said, the first 12 years, I went through a lot in terms of dealing with my emotions. He said, but I've gotten to a place where I know my truth. I know what is true, and the forces there be know what is true. And I'm just waiting for my moment to come so I can speak my truth. That led to me starting visiting Sean every single week for 5 straight years, every single week for 5 straight years. When Sean was granted bail in 2014, my daughter, again, my kids are going to be the death of me, I promise you. My daughter again said to me, the family was scrambling to find housing for Sean because he's coming out on bail with, a Boston police murder rumor over his head that he's done 22 years for. Nowhere wanted him, absolutely nowhere. And my daughter said to me, why can't Sean stay with us? And I looked at this girl, I'm like, what are you trying to do to me, child? What do you mean, why can't Sean stay with us? Firstly, we can't stay with us. Y'all are growing so fast. We need a bigger place. Like, what do you mean? And she said, well, Dre, you've always taught us to help in the time of need. She said, we've watched you given your last to some people who don't deserve it. And this is a family in need. And if you believe in Sean's cause, I think Sean should come and stay with us. And so when Sean was released, Sean lived with me for the first 3.5 years that he was out for. He moved out, I think, sometime in 2019. So, that's my connection and we've had many, late night conversation. I always jokingly say, well, seriously say, I gained a brother. I gained a little sister and a big brother. I'm the last of 5 children from my mom. I'm the only boy for my mom. So I have 5 older sisters because my father has a daughter as well. I have 5 older sisters, no brother. So I always say with Sean and his sister Sade, I gained a big brother and a younger sister.
So when I was running for office, in the backdrop was the Sean Ellis case regarding his potential 4th trial, which if you've watched the Netflix documentary, that's why it's called Trial 4. So in the first trial about the murder of Detective Mulligan, there was a conviction with respect to possession of firearms that was given to Sean, but the jury couldn't reach a verdict on the armed robbery of the firearm or the murder with the firearm. So it was a mistrial, and the prosecution, my office, even though I wasn't the DA, retried Sean again for that murder and armed robbery. A second jury could not reach a unanimous verdict, and there was a mistrial regarding the armed robbery of the gun and the homicide with the gun. Third trial, there was finally a conviction for the armed robbery and the murder. And that's when Sean went away or was sentenced to natural life without the possibility of parole. Fast forward, when you have a first-degree murder in Massachusetts, you have a direct appeal automatically to the Supreme Judicial Court. They said, nope, nothing looks wrong here, no problem. We start finding out, I of course wasn't the DA, but that Detective Mulligan was involved in criminal behavior with at least three of the detectives that injected themselves into the entire investigation of Detective Mulligan's murder, from the root to the tip, okay? And so my predecessor, who is a conservative district attorney, ultimately made the decision 2 weeks before I was inaugurated. They knew I had won. They knew likely that I was not going to sit and look at the level of corruption that we saw of the Boston police and the Brady violation, so not turning over evidence to Sean's lawyers, that I was going to say like, yeah, that seems cool. Okay, let's try him again for the 4th time. So what they did was they null-prossed. They decided we're not going to prosecute Sean again for the armed robbery or the murder. But remember, Sean still had the conviction for the possession of these guns. And why that's important, guys, is you can't be exonerated until you're exonerated for everything. And it seems ridiculous that it's like, wait a sec. So the murder and the armed robbery are gone, but the possession of these firearms we're going to keep and fight. And the office wouldn't budge on that. I take my role. Sean's lawyer files a motion for a new trial on the guns, and I require us to do all of the evidence, because even though Trial 4 is a great show, it's not evidence. It's a documentary and it's very well done. But I pulled all 39 boxes for every one of the 3 trials we had in the office I inherited, every appeal. I then pulled the internal affairs and anti-corruption files from the Boston Police Department. I made sure we went over all of the U.S. Attorney's Office files, because remember those 3 terrible police officers I told you about? 2 of them were indicted for 14 separate felonies in exchange for dismissing 40 other felonies. So they had 54 felonies total, and they only got 3 years each. Now, I'm a former federal prosecutor. Black kids in Roxbury that are charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office, not for murder, get 300 months. And I remember when I had my first case, I had to literally look up how many years is 300 months? 25 years for one transaction involving crack cocaine where there was a firearm in the console. These are police officers that engaged in 54 separate felonies. We dismissed 40 of them at the U.S. Attorney's Office, charged them with 14. One of them, we didn't even charge at all. We gave him immunity so he could help us turn on the other two, and the other two only got 3 years. So I looked at all of that and I said, alone, my name is on every single document that comes out of this office. I refuse to put my good name on any document that stands behind what our police department did. We should be ashamed. And we, as the government and the House, if you gamble, we don't get to cheat and then win. We just don't. We are held to a different standard. I don't want to hear what Michael Brown did. I don't want to hear, Michael Brown isn't a police officer, right? You know who's a police officer? The person who thought it appropriate to shoot and kill him. And why is it that there is restraint in law enforcement, which, by the way, Black people, we pay our taxes, our tax dollars pay for this very system that kills us, right? And then qualified immunity preclude, so, and then we pay for the DA that doesn't prosecute the officer that kills your son. And then qualified immunity says you can't sue the officer themselves. And then the mayor says, I'm gonna indemnify this officer, and whatever settlement we have to pay comes out of taxpayer dollars. So Black people and poor people and brown people, we lose and lose and lose and lose and lose and lose and lose. And so I said, no, I assent to this motion for a new trial. We will null pros this gun case. And what everyone always says is, but that'll open the floodgates. Open them. The only way that we start rebuilding trust in a system is having leadership that is willing to do the hard work to A, apologize, and B, roll your sleeves up and start the work of rebuilding trust in a system that is shattered and broken right now.
Absolutely. And I think, again, like I said, I do not pretend to be a law expert, but I remember sitting up and reading that website, just going through the website, justiceforseanellis.com, and clicking on the names of these police officers as it come up, and seeing things that just does not make sense, like the lineup, the picture lineup, and the identification. And I'm like, there is absolutely no way on earth that anyone can say that this kid at 19 years old, and again, I've said there's some selfishness in everything that I do. My kids, when you see me out there, when you hear me talking, whenever I'm anywhere, my children, their future and the future of my grandchildren is tantamount to everything that I do. Because at the end of the day, I've accepted that I'm a man of a certain age, and, there's some things that I might not see in this lifetime. But, Shay is 18 years old now. He's going to be 19 in September. Sean Ellis, Shay could easily be a Sean Ellis in another couple of months. You know what I mean? My daughter, my son that's in the Navy, like my kids can easily walk this path simply because of the color of their skin. And when I started checking out that website, it's like, you've got to be crazy. Like who have no experience with the law whatsoever, no training in criminal law whatsoever, could see that there's just some things that are fundamentally wrong and flawed about Sean Ellis's case. And I really think that's what, outside of my relationship with Sade, it's that, and having that first conversation with Sean where he was just so much at peace and very certain. I remember asking him directly, and I always share this, very certain. I asking him directly, look me in the eyes and tell me, are you guilty of what you're being accused of? And he looked me directly in the eyes and said to me, Reverend, at the time he called me, now he calls me bro. Reverend, if I did any of the things that I was accused of, I would own it at this point, because how many years at the time had passed. However, I am being framed and the system has taken my life away.
Thank you. DA Rollins, actually, but this is for both of you, but we'll start with DA Rollins. Can you speak to one specific intangible thing that could be done to address systematic racism in our criminal justice system? So we'll start with you, DA Rollins, and then go to Reverend Dr. Bennett.
So I think we can have one thing or we have to be moving simultaneously with lots of things, right? So Chief Justice Gantz, before his untimely death, commissioned a study to sort of show whether there were racial impacts throughout the criminal legal system, from charging decisions all the way up to sentencing. And, you know, for the people on this call, we all knew what the answer was going to be, but there is something required, of course, more of us than others, to sort of quantify or prove or annotate, right, what it is that we're saying. I think we have to have an affirmative duty to undo the harm that we did, right? Because every inaction results in more harm, right? The space moves between, for example, you know, we have 80 plus Superior Court judges in the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. 3 of them are Black. Superior Court is where the most violent, serious crimes go. And remember, some of the cases are civil, so there aren't even crimes, but I handle the crimes in Superior Court. I can assure you 3% of my defendants, there's more than 3% Black defendants, right? And I'm not saying Black judge means it's fair, but I'm just saying in the legal system, perception matters, right? Like I said to you before, if the person that arrests you, fingerprints you, drives you to court, walks you up the back, stands there as a corrections officer, your lawyer, your prosecutor, probation, clerk, and judge, none of them look like you, you're not going to think you have a shot in the system. So I think we need governors that are going to be appointing judges. We need people of all different backgrounds to be running for office. We need laws that are going to be inclusive and thoughtful and have a racial and equity lens. And then we need people with autonomy, which is what I have, what the Attorney General has, and quite frankly, what the other 10 DAs have, which is very different than, for example, our US Attorney, who is the chief federal officer in our state. That person reports up to the Attorney General of the United States of America, who reports up to the president. They are in a bureaucracy, right? I report to no one but the voters of Suffolk County. So why people are terrified of me is I don't have to ask the legislature, the governor, the mayor, the Boston City Council, Chelsea, Winthrop, or Revere City Council for permission before I do anything. But what you need is bold leadership who's going to say, this is BS, we're not dealing with it, and moving forward, we're doing it this way, right? And then you have to mark the data, and hopefully it supports what you're doing.
Dr. Harris, can you just repeat the question for me?
Oh, absolutely. Can you speak to one specific intangible thing that could be done to address systematic racism in our criminal justice system?
You know, I think the DA spoke very eloquently to the legislative and policy pieces of things that need to be done to address racism in our justice system. I want to speak to the very human aspect of it. See me as your equal. See me as your equal. When you see me, when you, the voters, because the DA, I believe, earlier told us how the system works in terms of, you know, just from the city council to the mayor to elect people who are going to take the unpopular positions, who are going to stand up for what is right, for what is true. Because here's the thing, and I try to educate my young people all the time. When laws are enacted, they have far-reaching consequences and impact. Yes, a law that is something that's signed into law today could affect my 4th and 5th generation 100 years from now. And what we find happening is that, you know, we say we want fairness and we're at a ripe time in this country where people are clamoring for equality and justice and equity and diversity and all that stuff. But if you look at how we're voting, our voting patterns, and thank God Boston finally decided that we need to see a woman of color, not just a woman, but a woman of color leading one of the large cities in the nation, but also leading the district attorney's office. Because the brunt of the racism is shouldered by the Black woman in our community. You know why I say that? Because most of it affects her son, her husband, or her brother. The brunt of it is shouldered by her. And so see me, when you look at me, when you think about who you're sending to create these laws and to oversee these legislations, think about me, think about my child, think about how that person is going to advocate or stand up for. And one of the reasons why I say at the onset that I'm totally fanning out over, I wish this was an in-person panel where I could get a signature, an autograph from Dear Rollins, is because I've been following her campaign. I don't live in Boston, so I couldn't, I still am not a citizen, so I can't vote, period. But I've been following her campaign, and I'm one of those people who will make a call to the office to say, okay, on the campaign trail, you said this, and this, like, can you give us a time as to when this, and this is gonna happen? And what I got from her was bold, a bold agenda. And what I've been seeing since her inauguration is bold leadership. Someone who's willing to take the unpopular side of things. And I think that's something tangible that we all can do when we're thinking, even in the school, because I'm watching the chats, even in the schools, when we're thinking of who our next president should be, who our next VP of student affairs, or whatever the positions, we need to start thinking about who is most impacted and affected by the policies, the laws, and the things that are being pushed out. And then we need to make our decisions based on that. Because we can sit here and we can have all the trainings we want and we can have all the marches. Listen, right now in Minnesota, there's a march going on less than a year to the date of George Floyd's murder. Why? Because another Black man was murdered senselessly by police. And we saw George Floyd's murder created a firestorm across the globe, and still these things are happening. So we can march, we can do all the things that we want to do until we start injecting or electing people who are fair, who are honest, and who are willing to do the right things that impact and benefit all of us equally. I know how corny that sounds, but that's the thing, that's one tangible thing that comes to my mind.
Thank you both so very much. I know there were some questions, but I also want to be very respectful of time and that DA Rollins needs food. So, Lori, I don't know if you want to.
I'm so sorry. I know. I'm like,
No.
I just can't help it. I literally have been meeting all day, and salt and vinegar potato chips are so good.
So
Who
good.
doesn't love salt and vinegar potato chips?
So good.
They are so good. But no, thank you both. I think you were just so interesting that we ran over time, and that's okay. But maybe we could email you the questions from the chat if you wouldn't mind responding offline. Would that work?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming. And could you just join me in giving them a big hand?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for everyone, I'll send out this recording once it's processed if you would like to watch it later. So, thank you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night.
It's great to be with you all.
Thank you.